With a major selection of the looks your kiddos love starting at just $4 in the Walmart app, a new school year means a stylish new them. Who knew? Find skater skirts and Crocs that say, I'm casual but cool. Sparkly sneakers that say, it's my classroom, you're just learning in it. And preppy polos that say, I'm the teacher's pet, even if they're mommy's menace at home. Find their favorite styles starting at just $4 in the app. The Walmart you thought you knew is now new.
This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, and Brewers Outlet. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and Sunbury Motor Company. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
So what, Nutella is buying Kellogg's? I mean, does that mean suddenly out of nowhere Frosted Flakes are going to have a little like Nutella flavor to them? I don't know. All right, so this half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. And ready-to-drink cocktails. High Noon, Jack Daniels, Crown Royal, Pickle Bar led by the Barrels and the Dills. Indeed, second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Always fortunate to have such great guests, and that includes Nick Farabaugh. Nick, welcome back. Great to have you with us.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Steve. It's always great to be on.
All right. This is going to be a slightly, it's football related, and I'll get to the Steelers here in a second. But there's been some talk that the NFL, especially after seeing that ESPN is now paying more money to the NBA for their contract as opposed to what they pay to the NFL for Monday Night Football and the highlight package, that they may want to renegotiate some of their deals before 2028. How do you view the NFL stance with TV right now as the most powerful entity in the country?
Yeah, they can absolutely up their rates really over anybody, and they have no issue throwing it around to streaming options. That has made their bargaining power so much more potent, I think, as well. The deal with Amazon is such a albatross deal for Thursday Night Football that Monday Night Football and Sunday Night Football and the other special games that could be streaming only now becomes so valuable. And so when you look at something like Monday Night Football and really that highlights package, and you see the NBA getting so much more money in their new rights, and even things like the MLB. The MLB obviously is probably third right now. They're getting a hefty deal. And then you see things like F1 going over $100 million. The NFL is looking around and saying, man, we got to get more from that. And the NFL is going to try, and they hold all the leverage, because you can't run a major sports network and not talk about the NFL. The NFL is the ultimate driver of traffic, and so they have all the leverage there, and they're going to set records upon records upon records. And so I think that when you look at the TV rights deal, is something that I do think they will look into. Maybe not this year, but next year I think is certainly something when we are going to see them probably renegotiate some of those.
Okay. Great answer, because I was thinking the same way that you were thinking about that. When you look at the restructuring of the Steelers, how did you view the Jalen Ramsey addition? What do they lose in Minka Fitzpatrick, and what do they gain with Jalen Ramsey?
This is crazy to say, because it feels crazy to say this, Steve, because Minka did so many things for them. But I think they actually got more versatile with Jalen Ramsey. And that's something to think about when you look at what Ramsey does. Not only does he play outside, he plays the slot. He can play some linebacker. He can play some safety. He can play all over the football field. And he's going to be their kind of do-it-all sub-package chess piece, but he's going to be the supercharged version of it because he is so good in man coverage. He's going to be able to take away tight ends. He'll be able to take away wide receivers. You can play him outside, so you don't have to play 34-year-old, soon-to-be 35-year-old Darius Slay all the time. They got a bigger corner that can play in the slot, so their blitz packages and their run defense from that area of the field, much improved. I think you also look at the NFL nowadays, and a lot of the stuff happens near the line of scrimmage, quick game. You're not taking away as much down the field anymore, not making teams stretch the field out anymore because you're seeing so many teams go to cover two, these two high shells, playing quarters. The Fangio schemes are all around the NFL. The Steelers are one of those rare teams that actually play the single high game, but teams still play them very similarly to how they play the two high teams. And so Ramsey's going to be able to make more impact around the line of scrimmage. They certainly lose a canopy over top of Minka. And even though Minka wasn't making the splash plays that he did when he was at his all-pro height, he was still a very good player, and they'll miss that. I think they need another safety. But what they get in Jalen Ramsey is this versatile chess piece that can do so much for them at the line of scrimmage, so much for them on the back end, that it really opens up a lot for them.
Which then brings us to the other acquisition, and this is where I think familiarity comes into play.
Arthur Smith had Jonnu Smith in Tennessee. He had Jonnu Smith in Atlanta. Now they've acquired him here. Not America's greatest blocker, but what does he bring to the table as a receiver for Aaron Rodgers?
He brings something different that they didn't have, and I think that's important. He brings a yak threat. He brings a quick game threat that they did not have last year. He is not a wide receiver 2 answer. I've seen some people say that. I don't agree with that, even though he's a tight end. He can be your second or third option along with Pat Frymuth, though, and you can split him out. You can use him in the slot. You can use him in kind of this quick game screen game. Like the screen game is a big part of Arthur Smith's offense, and Jonnu Smith can turn a screen into an explosive play anytime he gets the ball in his hand. And I think that is going to be big for them. They had nobody on this roster last year, Steve, that you could just dump the ball off to and expect to make something with the ball in their hands. They had no yak threat. The fact that they have somebody now, even if it's Jonnu Smith, who's a tight end, who is probably the most explosive yak threat at that position, at least last year was, in the NFL, that's a big boost for them. And so that's something he'll bring. For Aaron Rodgers, who has become so quick game-oriented late in his career, that's a big thing. I think Rodgers is going to love Jonnu Smith. Smith's going to be able to spread the field as well when they go into empty in the gun. He can seam bust. He can run posts and corners and things like that. So they get a great athlete that can do a lot of different things. He's a different kind of weapon, but they never had that type of weapon last year. So they do add something they didn't have.
Nick, this will be a question that will be better answered in October, but I'll ask it going into training camp. Is this a better roster today than a year ago?
I think it is. I don't think it's significant, though. And I think that is something to say, because I do think that they're better corner. They're way better corner, actually, with Slay and Ramsey there. I think they're better on the defensive line after drafting Harmon and other guys there. I think Rodgers is a better player right now than Wilson is. I think Metcalf is better than Pickens. I think overall there are upgrades they made across this roster that say it's going to be better. I'm just not sure, Steve, it's going to be so much better to where it changes my outlook significantly of them. So I appreciate them going for it and making some really ballsy, gutsy moves. But I also think there's still holes on this roster. Wide receiver, while maybe a little better, not that much better. Safety, now an issue. The coaching staff, I think you can have fair questions about, and how good still is Rodgers, even if I think he's better than Wilson. Is he enough in the AFC to draw you to a few postseason wins? I think that's also a question. So still questions about the roster, even though I think they're a little better than they were last year.
All right, now the question is the roster any closer to Baltimore's roster? And we know that Cincinnati's defense is very much, they're going to win a lot of 37-34 games. But they've got Burrow, they've got Chase, they've got Higgins. They have a roster offensively. Are they competitive with Cincinnati's roster? So how competitive in their own division are they?
Yeah, I think with Cincinnati now, they have at least weapons to try and neutralize that offense a little bit. Ramsey and Slay along with Porter, at least I think gives you a much better shot at neutralizing Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. And so I think that is a positive for them. I like them head-to-head, actually, with their roster. Since these rosters are rough, their O-line is not great. On top of that defense, and I do think the Steelers' offense this year, with some of the additions they've made, at least has the chance to have more sustained peaks than they did last year. I don't think it's going to be a great offense, but I think it could be like the 15th best offense in football, which is much better than last year. They ended up about 22nd, 23rd last year. So that would be good enough for them if they have a more efficient running game. With Baltimore, though, I think Baltimore might have the best team overall just on paper right now in the entire division and maybe the AFC. I think you can argue that. So, I mean, are they a little closer to Baltimore? I guess. They focused, obviously, on the trenches to try and stop Derrick Henry and slow him down. So maybe they have more of a formula there in a matchup with Baltimore. But, I mean, I think Baltimore's far and away a better roster than Pittsburgh right now.
And, again, you just never know how injuries play a role in this. I mean, a couple of years ago, Baltimore had a great roster, and then Lamar Jackson got hurt. And Huntley had to play a lot of quarterback, who's fine as a backup. But that's the part you can't count on at this point. Are the Steelers, and I know I've asked you this before, Nick, is it still feel like it's the old time Atlanta Hawks where they're good enough to be in the playoffs, not good enough to advance, which means they're not good enough to they're not bad enough to get a high draft pick?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, listen, I could see them winning a playoff game this year. I actually think they could, but
there you go.
I'm not sure going to Houston and beating the Texans is much different if you get blown out in the divisional round by the Bills. Like, does that change much? I don't know. I think chasing a playoff win isn't necessarily a smart strategy as a franchise. You want to chase Super Bowls, not playoff wins. And so I do think they're kind of in the muck here where they're just kind of floating around the same thing. They might be 10-7, 11-6, and maybe they do notch a playoff win, but a lot of their moves this year, I mean, Ramsey's 30, Smith is 30, DK Metcalf is one of the younger pieces they added, but Slay might retire after this year. We know Rodgers is probably retiring. So a lot of these moves they've made this offseason are to try and patch something together this year and try and break that drought, but also try and create something to where they can make a run. I just do not buy this team in the upper echelon of the AFC. I just don't. I think that they're in the second, maybe third tier, and they can certainly notch off a playoff win. But I do think they're still in that kind of vortex where they're going to probably pick somewhere between 18 and 24-ish. I think that's probably their range.
How do the fans feel about all this? That's part of what you do, Nick. You also get a gauge in this, not just on the team and what Mike thinks and so forth. You also get a gauge on what the fans think. What do they think?
Yeah, there's a lot of frustration, and you can feel it. I mean, it's palpable. Just after a while, when you make the playoffs and you see nothing for it, I mean, not even a close game, you just get blown out. And you have disappointments like Jacksonville and Cleveland, and there's just other things that pop up each year. And sometimes it's the same things: the coaching deficits that you have offensively, the inability to win the big games. It's like we've watched the same movie 5 times in a row. And so you're going to have frustration there. If you make it to the playoffs, but every fan expects when you get to the playoffs you're going to get blown out, making it to the playoffs doesn't mean much anymore. And the Steelers, listen, if you look at their kind of base stats in terms of how much they've made the playoffs, I mean, you say this is a very healthy, successful franchise, but they've lost 6 straight playoff games in a row. They haven't won one in 8 years. I mean, for fans, you're expecting to go into the playoffs and lose. Like, that's, I think, a debilitating feeling as a fan. You want to at least be able to suspend belief for a little bit and say, could you actually make that Super Bowl run? And I don't think any fan last year when they made the playoffs literally believed they could ever make that Super Bowl run by the time they made it. And so it is frustrating because you're just watching the same things. It feels like as much as things change, you change coaches, you change quarterbacks, you change all wide receivers, you change all this, the same things keep happening. And at some point you got to look and say, why is that? And as a fan, that definitely, I think, gets draining.
Well, you made an interesting statement there that making the playoffs isn't good enough anymore. Is that how much sports has changed, where making the playoffs would be like, okay, now let's see what we can do, as opposed to, so what, they got there? How big a change mentally is that from fan bases, not just the Steelers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Steelers are unique in that. I think, for example, if the Jaguars make the playoffs, it's a little different.
There's a parade. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. The Steelers are like the Steelers, right? It's like any team that you look at in baseball, like the Yankees. If you're the Yankees, you're not satisfied with just making the ALDS. You want to make the World Series. Same thing with the Dodgers. Like, the Steelers are one of those franchises. They're held to a different level. They're held to a different standard. And I do think for fans, when you are a Steelers fan, you have your expectations altered that way. And I don't think it's necessarily a sports thing overall. I think to some degree it is. I do see more and more fans kind of altering their mindset from how do we make the playoffs to how do you actually win a World Series, a NBA championship, a Super Bowl, whatever. But I think for the Steelers, it is so different because you have a tradition of winning over the last 50 years where this team hasn't really had a dry spell even when they were bad. I mean, when they were in the 80s and 90s, they didn't even have a quarterback, and they still made the Super Bowl with Neil O'Donnell. I mean, so even when they were down, they were up. And so I think that's something. And now you have a whole generation, Steve, of fans that grew up on their 2 Super Bowl wins, right, in the 00s. And so I think that's something, too. So I do think the Steelers having that unique franchise gravitational pull is something that I look at specifically when I say that statement because it's just a different standard in Pittsburgh.
When training camp begins, and I know camp's a little bit different now compared to what it was years gone by, what will you actually be looking for?
Yeah, I think right now when you go to training camp and you try and see what the Steelers are looking at, what I look at is just basic cohesion. And I think that's part of it. You know, last year you could see them at times not be cohesive. They had a lot of change, right? Wilson got hurt, then he was in, then he was out. It was kind of in and out. And what you really look for, I think, in an individual player basis is who has traits to translate onto the field. And, you know, some of these guys that are training camp standouts, a lot of these plays are just not translatable. You know, you're not really hitting even in the pads when they're in pads. It's not like you're simulating football. It's just football-like. It's not actually football. And so athletic traits, I think, still matters a lot. If you're a really good athlete, I think you have naturally a better chance of maybe standing out and making the team. If guys just keep showing up and keep doing the right things, drill to drill, and team period to team period, I think that's another thing you look at. Guys that make plays, you know, specifically, for example, defensive backs. If you get picks, if you get forced fumbles, make a name for yourself. That's one way to do it. And so there are other like little traits you can look at that translate. But I think cohesion on a team-wide scale, specifically on things like offensive line play, defensive back communication, things like that are something you watch because the basics got to be hammered out by week 1. Otherwise, you know, you saw the Steelers last year, for example, they were busting coverages down the stretch last year, and that's what can lead to something that was minor really snowballing into something major.
So that brings up now something that's unresolved. That's T.J. Watt. How do you envision that playing out?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be probably for a while. I don't necessarily think it's going to happen for training camp. Maybe it does. Here's what I know about that situation, Steve. The Steelers right now, I think, are willing to make him an offer that gives him more per year than Myles Garrett. I think that he is probably going to become the highest non-paid quarterback in football when this is all said and done. But it's the guaranteed structure and it's the contract length. When you are dealing with a 31-year-old, soon-to-be 31-year-old edge rusher that is primarily a speed rusher and relies on explosiveness and speed, how does that guy age is a big question. And T.J. Watt, I think, wants that third-year guaranteed. So his age 33 season guaranteed. Myles Garrett got that third-year guaranteed, but he's a year younger. So significant to note there. That's not a small hurdle. That's a big hurdle. If you want that full 30-year guarantee, the Steelers don't usually do that. They did do that for DK Metcalf, but Metcalf is 27. So it's way different. And you look at that contract, and he probably wants 4 or 5 years so he can decide when he retires and when he's going to walk away from the game. T.J. Watt wants security in this deal. He wants to make sure that if he signs it, he's going to be a Steeler for the rest of his career. And it's probably his last contract in football. And so if it's not with the Steelers, he wants to make sure it's somewhere else. And so I don't think a trade is really realistic at all. I don't even think they've discussed it. I don't think they've really thought about it. Teams probably called them. But I think right now the offer is probably going to be over Myles Garrett per year. It's going to be that guaranteed structure, and it's going to be the language of those guarantees that it comes down to. And that's a tricky situation when you're getting into old edge rusher talk.
Yeah, well, again, age does play a role, but then again, I give you credit. You have aged well. Nick, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, Steve. Appreciate it as always.
Anytime. Nick Farabaugh, outstanding. And this half hour being brought to you by our good friends at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere, wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and hot every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. Pickle bar, led by the barrels and the dills, indeed second to none, and ready-to-drink cocktails. High Noon, Jack Daniel's Crown Royal. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury. The beverage supermarket. All right, back with more in a moment here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Be a hero with zero at Sunbury Motors Hyundai. With 0% APR financing for 60 months, you can save $8,987 in interest on a 2025 Hyundai Santa Fe with 19 to choose from. And save $9,780 in interest over the term on 2025 Palisades. But you have to act fast. SMC only has 8 remaining. Remember, all new Hyundais come with Hyundai Assurance and are backed by America's best warranty. 10 years, 100,000-mile limited powertrain warranty. Be a hero with zero. Hurry in now and save $9,780 in interest over 5 years on a 2025 Palisade and $8,987 in interest over the 5 years on a 2025 Hyundai Santa Fe. Only at Sunbury Motors Hyundai in the North 4th Street Auto Plaza, Sunbury. Vehicle savings based on finance comparison between 0% and 5.99% APR for 60 months. See dealer for details. Your summer just got better with Kia Bonus Cash at Sunbury Motors Kia. Summer is heating up at Sunbury Motors Kia with as much as $2,500 in Kia Finance Bonus Cash. That's what you'll save on the 2025 Kia Sorento and get 1.9% APR financing for 60 months. The best-selling model at Sunbury Motors Kia, the 2025 Kia Sportage, has $500 off in Kia Finance Bonus Cash and has 1.9% APR financing for 60 months. Tired of going to the gas station all the time? Well, SMC has the 2025 all-wheel drive Kia Sportage hybrid models available that get 38 mpg. Say goodbye to all those pump visits. Remember, every new Kia comes with a 10-year, 100,000-mile limited powertrain warranty. Save now at Sunbury Motors Kia on the Strip in Hummel's Wharf.